Good morning to everybody. I'm Gustavo Merino, Director of Social Policies in UNESCO, and it's a real pleasure for me to open the discussion on a topic which is at the heart of scientific progress and human advancement, the freedom, safety, and responsibility of scientists. Science flourishes when it's practiced in an environment that fosters intellectual autonomy, protects the safety of researchers, and encourages responsibility in the pursuit of knowledge. Such conditions not only accelerate scientific progress, but also build public trust in science and evidence-based policymaking, which benefits the entire society. Yet, as we know, these fundamental values are under increasing pressure. Surveys show that scientists working on sensitive issues like climate change or from vulnerable groups such as women scientists face disproportionate levels of harassment and abuse. And these challenges threaten not only the well-being of individual researchers, but the integrity and inclusiveness of science itself and scientific advancement. UNESCO seeks to address these challenges head-on by fostering a supportive environment where scientists can thrive, free from undue interference, and reach their potential for the benefit of humanity. And with this, our partnership with the International Science Council plays a vital role in this effort, as both organizations share a long-standing commitment to promoting science for the common good and advancing sustainable development. So today we're going to explore these important topics, starting with opening remarks by two very knowledgeable and eminent speakers, which I'll introduce in a second. Following the discussion, we have two panels, and there will be an opportunity for Q&A sessions, which will conclude with closing remarks. So first, it's an honor for me to welcome our distinguished guests for the opening remarks, Lydia Brito and Sir Peter Gluckman. Lydia Brito has held various positions in UNESCO. She's now the Assistant Director General for Natural Sciences, but she has also been Regional Director for Southern Africa, Regional Director for Science in Latin America, and also Director for Science and Policy. And Sir Peter Gluckman, which many of you know as well, has been President of the International Science Council since 2021. It's a globally recognized biomedical scientist, and was at some point in the past New Zealand's first Chief Science Advisor to the Prime Minister, and remains a committed advocate for sustainability through his roles at ISC and the Global Commission on Science Missions for Sustainability. So without further ado, Lydia Brito, if you would like to give some remarks.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. It's a great pleasure to be back to Budapest and to be back to the World Science Forum in Budapest. It's been a few years since I was here, and thanks for coming to our side event to kick off some of the key discussions that we will have during the World Science Forum. Allow me to start by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to Sir Peter Gluckman and the ISC Committee for Freedom and Responsibility in Science, our long-standing partners, for jointly organizing this session. We are also very privileged, and I want to thank the speakers from the first and second panel and the moderators, because I do believe that we need to bring as much diversity in our reflections, because the challenges when we talk about scientific freedom and responsibility and protection of scientists are very different from continent to continent. Even inside the same continent, the challenges are very different. And we know that we are, as Gustavo already mentioned, it's a topic that is very much at the center of the scientific community, but we are also hope that is at the center of the policy debate, because we do need the policymakers also to recognize that without a healthy scientific community at national, regional, and global level, it's going to be very hard for us all to face the challenges of today's and of tomorrow. And allow me, because I think Gustavo took a little bit of my speaking points, so I'm going to speak without speaking points and from the heart. And I think when we talk about scientific freedom and responsibility and protection of scientists, we have 4 or 5 dimensions that we need to address. And coming from the South, I would say the first dimension on scientific freedom has to do with funding of research. We are seeing the scientific funding shrinking and shrinking, and seeing budgets for less important areas, including wars and security, national security, increasing when the scientific budgets are going down and down. And that is the first freedom, in particular for South scientists, that is taken away, because in order to do science, they have to leave their countries. They have to do science elsewhere, because in their countries, there are no funding for research. And then we have, of course, the second pillar that has to do with agendas that are tied to priorities that are not necessarily sustainable development priorities. Many times they are priorities that have to do with political agendas. And therefore, you don't have the freedom as a scientist to really pursue not only your curiosity, what is something that is important in science, but also feeling relevant to what's happening around you, and as a scientist you want to give answers. So very tight research agendas with very little space for creativity, for thinking out of the box, and for bringing a science that is relevant to what's happening. The third dimension, and not least important, and Gustavo mentioned that, is repression. It's when you see scientists being persecuted because they are putting scientific facts in the table that may contest or confront the political situation in a certain space. And that, of course, we are seeing, and for example, a good example, and UNESCO is working on that, it's on the environmental sciences. We are seeing a lot of environmentalists and environmental scientists being persecuted because they are putting in the table facts that nobody can ignore. And therefore, they are persecuted, and they are not allowed sometimes even to participate in debates and to speak openly. And together with persecution, two specific thematic areas on science, there is also the gender issue that you also mentioned, Gustavo, that is how many female scientists are also being arrested in their working environment, and etc. And that's why UNESCO put forward this year in February a call of action to reduce the gender gap. And one of the points of action is how to change the work environment for female scientists so that they can feel safe and cheered in those environments. We see a lot of young women starting into a science career, and they leave. And they leave because it's not an easy environment to work for a woman. And we are losing, therefore, very important capacities, and we need it all. It's a question of intelligence. We need to mobilize all the intelligence possible that we have available in the world in order to erase, to come up with solutions that are important. And finally, the fourth one, and today is a big problem, it's in conflict areas. And again, plus the call that we made on March this year, we are also now designing a program on science in crisis. Because we do believe that more and more we are seeing scientists in situations of crisis. Sometimes are man-made crises related to conflict, but we also have situations of science in crisis in case of natural disasters, where a lot of infrastructure, science infrastructure is destroyed because of major natural disasters. So that's the fourth dimension, when science is in crisis, either because of conflict situations, but also because of natural disasters. So what we are doing from a perspective of UNESCO, and Gustavo mentioned a few of it, one is the call to really protect and safeguard scientists and freedom of scientific freedom. But also, we have two very important recommendations of UNESCO that will help us to implement that. And of course, one of that is the recommendation on science and scientific researchers that was approved in 2017. It was not the first recommendation, it was a revised recommendation. And it's a normative instrument that can help us really to work with member states and to ensure that their policies, their mechanisms are indeed in the frame of supporting the scientific community, the freedom, the scientific freedom, and the importance of making our scientific communities inclusive. The other one is, of course, the open science recommendation from 2021, because it sets up principles of equity, of inclusivity, of fairness, of sharing not only knowledge and data, but also infrastructure, also capacity building possibilities, and really recognizing and pushing forward that if we look at science and the right to science and the very important and enabling human right, then science has to be open and has to be fair and has to be inclusive. So it's a great pleasure to be with you today, and really, really, I believe that we can together, both the scientific community but also the policymakers, to engage in a meaningful way to make sure that indeed we have a healthy scientific community, that we can look forward to productive scientific cooperation, that we can also make sure, and I'm looking at Jan Marcos, my good friend, that we can again make sure that science diplomacy is at the center of building peace, of giving us the solutions for a more for sustainable development, a more just and fair, and I would say happier world. I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Lydia Brito, for these words and a better understanding of what UNESCO is doing in this topic. And we now move to Sir Peter Gluckman, please.
The International Science Council is based about 2 kilometers from UNESCO in Paris. And what Lydia and I have been doing, and Gabriella as well, is rebuilding the relationship between the two organizations to what it must be, which is taking a much stronger relationship between the Intergovernmental Organization for Science and the ISC, which represents the active scientific community of the world through the scientific organizations. And central to that relationship has been the long-standing joint commitment around the issues of this forum. The Committee on Freedom and Responsibility of Science of the ISC is its oldest standing committee, and one which has worked very closely with Lydia and Gabriella and their predecessors over many years. And as I said, we're working to really strengthen, because it will be the hand-in-hand relationship between our two organizations where we can really impact on the policy community. Now, the disadvantage of speaking after Gustavo and Lydia is there's not much else to say. So I could stop now, but allow me at least 90 seconds to make the points which I was going to make, had I not been a gentleman and let Lydia speak first. There are many reasons why we must be vigilant and active in protecting scientific freedoms. If science is truly driven by its principles and is a universal language, and I'll speak much more about that later on today, then scientists by definition must be free to pursue knowledge limited only by the nature of their employment, ethical considerations, and funding availability. But we know that's not the case. In too many countries, scientific funding is inadequate or very narrowly focused and limits what scientists can do. In some countries, science cannot address issues such as evolution or issues such as the drivers of loss of social cohesion because of autocratic, theological, or ideological constraints. And in other cases, as we've seen growing and growing and growing, geostrategic concerns are limiting collaborations, movement of young scientists to form the networks they will need for their careers to progress. And I think the issues around the inability of young scientists to get visas to get to scientific congresses is something that needs a lot more attention than we're able to give it. And I spoke yesterday to the young scientist community about what the ISC is prepared to do to try and think about that particular issue. But scientists must also recognise, and here's the kicker, that responsibilities come with the right to claim academic freedom. And that includes being responsible about producing good science, not bad science. The responsibility that it's subject to peer review. The responsibility, most of all, not to use their elite status as scientists to claim expertise in areas they're not expert in. And I think we need to be very clear that rights and responsibilities are two sides of the same coin. But as Lydia's also mentioned, there's a much more acute and insidious issue which is now rearing its head. Attacks on scientists driven by populists and conspiracy theorists, driven by social media storms, who don't like what science is saying or revealing. Many scientists, even in the most developed and otherwise peaceful countries, now being caught in social media storms and even physical attacks simply for presenting their science, which can reveal uncomfortable truths. It's a huge issue, even in a country like New Zealand. And in a world with over 50 active conflicts, more than at any time since World War II, all horrific in nature, scientists and their institutions become, as Lydia said, victims. Although paradoxically, we must remember and acknowledge that war is basically a competition of scientific technologies, and that we're seeing that more and more and more. And this leads to a particular issue, more so than any other time in history. Science, technology, economic growth, and geostrategic interests are intertwined. And we're hearing this new mantra: open as possible, closed as necessary. And while that's understandable for certain kinds of science, there's a real danger it will be misused, and that we are past the peak of open science, with all the devastating consequences that would have, not just for people in the global south, but in addressing the global commons. And so we need to make sure that that does not become a misused statement. It's interesting that those statements were made by every Minister of Science who attended the European Commission meeting on scientific cooperation earlier this year, and the 60 countries' ministers who attended the ministerial meeting that you and I attended at the OECD. So there's a danger point here. We understand why there will be limits in this geostrategically tense world, but they must not be misused and over-implied. It's a huge issue which worries me immensely. And as Lydia said, many scientists, as do so many others, suffer in conflict, and some organisations and academies and the ISC, as Vivi will talk about, do a remarkable job in assisting displaced scientists and trying to find them a way to continue in their precious careers. All of these are dimensions of the topic of today's panel, and as I said, the panel's focus is a core focus for the ISC itself. Freedoms, rights and responsibilities are all linked, and they're all under stress in this very complex period of geostrategic multipolar tension which we're now entering. We've all got a responsibility, particularly UNESCO and ISC working together to find ways to be vigilant and active to try and ensure that science can do what it can do, be the universal language that can make a positive difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Peter Gluckman and Lydia Brito for their enlightening words. And we now move immediately to the first panel. I understand that in this first panel we have Krista Kovacs, and I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing correctly, Senior Research Fellow at Berlin Social Science Center. And well, I think they put there, so I don't have to go through all their bios. And then Husebek on my right, and we will also have up here Tiago Braga and Slaven Misliencevic. Could you come up, please? Thank you. Thank you. So for their interventions, I give the word first to Krista, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really pleased and honored to talk to such a distinguished audience. I brought a map to show the situation of academic freedom in 2023 around the globe. This figure shows the state of academic freedom last year based on the latest version of the Academic Freedom Index. This index is produced by Professor Katrin Kinzelbach and her team. I'm not doing this, I'm not an empirical scholar, but I'm using this map to show you. Countries with the higher academic freedom index are indicated with the many shades of blue. And countries with low or very low academic freedom index are highlighted or are shown in different shades of red. Now, we can see that academic freedom globally is under threat. And as the map shows, this trend affects the most populous countries in the world, including India, China, or the United States. And the map also shows that there is a clear link between academic freedom and the democratic quality of the country. Countries experiencing democratic backsliding and or autocratization are facing a decline in academic freedom. Now, these worrisome trends are challenging us academics. So I wanted to address academic freedom to see what it is that is in decline and why it matters. And here comes my next slide. This figure provides an overview of how I and my colleagues in the scientific research team understand the concepts of freedom of science and academic freedom. We think that freedom of science is an umbrella term, and it encompasses the right to science and academic freedom. As you can see, the right to science, it is on the right-hand side indicated with blue, it is a human right. So it applies to every human being, and we think that everyone can engage in scientific activity to discover what is true without having any professional background. Now, academic freedom, on the other hand, is a professional freedom. And it is the freedom of those who engage in scientific activity as scientists, as academics. And it includes the freedom of scientific research, of course, and also the dissemination, the communication of the research outputs, the research outcome. And we also think that academic freedom encompasses the freedom of higher education teaching, also Lehrfreiheit, and the freedom of higher education learning, Lernfreiheit. And we also mentioned two other things on this figure. First, the autonomy of the academic institutions. And under this institutional autonomy, we mean two things. First, the independence of the academic institutions, of course, independence from governance, from the government, and self-governance of the academic institutions. And we may add that there are certain professional privileges, like tenure, and this is what you can see on the slide, These are conceptually not a direct part of academic freedom, but we can say that this is a functional condition for the protection of academic freedom. Now, I have still 2 minutes, so why does academic freedom matter? I think it is an important question, and I think there is a deep connection between academic freedom and democracy. First, because academic freedom supports the autonomy of everyone. In our lives, we have to make several decisions in various fields, in various matters, financial matters, health matters, political matters. And if we want to make these decisions in an informed way, then we need science. We are dependent of knowing and understanding of our health situation and the possibilities of medical science. And this is the same when it comes to our political decisions. So we are dependent on knowing and understanding the political process. So this is the first point. And the second point that is that academic freedom also supports the practice of self-government. Because insights and arguments generated by researchers and scientists are fed into the political process through their interviews, their podcasts, and the roundtable talks like this one today. So I think academic freedom serves both individual and collective self-government, and this is why academic freedom matters even for those who are not part of academia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Krista. We now give the word to Anne Hosebek, please.
Well, I'll just start. My name is Anne Husbekk. I'm here as the chair of the Committee for Freedom and Responsibility in Science in International Science Council. I'm a professor of immunology by profession at UIT, the Arctic University of Norway. Okay, there it is. So, well, move to the next slide. I will start with a short introduction of International Science Council, which is a member organization of academies and associations and unions all over the world. ISC has an ambitious vision, to have advanced science as the global public good, and also a ambitious mission, which is the global voice for science. And I think in order to reach the vision, it is absolutely important to ensure a freedom and responsibility in science. So, if we look at the principle of freedom and responsibility in science, we will see that these principles are also in the statutes and rules for ISC that was renewed in March 2024. And the new principles are devised against the current context within the Council operates, worldwide climate, ecological and societal crisis, versus of the political tensions that are exerting pressure on science systems and international science collaboration, and increasing threats to the safety of scientists and their freedom to operate. And in the pandemic, we saw that the research was appreciated, and we have the vaccine pretty soon after the outbreak, but also that there was a growing threat to scientists that was part of the science. So if we look at the principles that our ISC has made, it's 7 principles, 4 on freedom, 3 on freedom, and 4 on responsibilities. We can easily see that fulfilling these principles that the vision science as a global public good may be reached. In addition, we will secure science literacy, which is extremely important, and trust in science, both at the utmost importance for science to be a useful tool to a healthy global development. In summary, it is important as freedom and responsibility in science to foster innovation and discovery, allowing scientists to push boundaries and explore new frontiers, responsibility to ensure these pursuits are ethical, respecting both human and environmental rights. Together, these principles not only advance knowledge, but also ensure that scientific progress contributes positively to society and adheres to ethical standards. We have already heard the Freedom Index being explained, and I don't go into that further. Krista has already done that. But as we see in this figure, the decline is pronounced and worrisome. J. Robert Oppenheimer was a famous German quantum physicist that was the PI of the US Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer seemed to be overexcited on nuclear power and could not resist being head of a project developing nuclear bombs. His research led to a result with devastating consequences for the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and development of nuclear weapons in many countries. The Nobel Peace Prize this year is awarded an organization of survivors and families from the bombs fighting against nuclear weapons. His research had a dual use that he must have understood, but he did not respect it enough to stop the project. He started an anti-nuclear bomb movement after the Second World War, unfortunately too late to prevent the widespread availability of nuclear weapons today. So there is a few threats to freedom of science, and it has already been mentioned by both Lydia and Peter. Political interference is one of those, which has been described. It is not only to cancel certain disciplines or certain topics from being subjected to research and education, but also to stop, in some countries, half of the population, females, from being part of science system. There are certain economic pressures, both related to funding that's with strings attached, but also to lack of funding that Lydia talked about. And with efficient social media and conspiration and mistrust in science, it's hard for scientific results to compete with misinformation. Researchers always apply significant levels and chances of results to be wrong, which is not the case for those who disinform. There are threats to responsibility in science, and some of those are ethical challenges. Legislations lagging behind, and new technologies may develop in unethical directions. For instance, there has been a lot of attention towards genetic manipulation of cells. Genetic manipulation of germ cells is another story that has already taken place. There is a publication pressure. Publish or perish is something that we all know about. And there is a lack of diversity in the science system globally, with a more pronounced science production in the north, and some groups being left out of science that I have already mentioned. There are some strategies to mitigate those threats, and advocacy for independent funding is one thing, and IC has been starting a discussion about that. Strengthening ethical standards and education, And that is, of course, to include ethical training in the education from very early on, and enhancing transparency and accountability, and of course, to secure open science. Freedom in science allows researchers to explore, question, and communicate ideas without undue interference, while responsibility ensures these activities are conducted ethically and beneficially. It's imperative for the global scientific community, policymakers, and the public to collaborate in safeguarding these principles to foster an ethical and progressive scientific environment. Let us all be part of and support free and responsible science. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna Uzbek from the East. And now we move to Tiago Braga, who's director for the Brazilian Institute for Science Technology for Digital Democracy. Please, Tiago.
Thank you very much. The Brazilian Institute of Information Science Technology is an institute focused on preparing infrastructures to promote science. Let me see. This newspaper is one of the most important Brazilian newspaper. And here we have a piece of news related to some scientists. They have a podcast. It's called I Never Saw Scientist. And they were discussing about some guy. And this guy, it related diabetes with arms. And these scientists showed why this is not real, why it's fake science. And what happened is that these two scientists, they were prosecuted and had to pay an amount of money because they showed the guy's name. And now this our Supreme Court have changed the decision, so the scientists have not to pay anymore. But what this brings is something that is happening in Brazil, and I think based on what we have heard here in other countries too. So scientists, they are suffering of some kind of lawfare, and we have been looking to work with that. So what we have been working on Brazil, sorry, it's in Portuguese. I did not have the time to translate to English, but I will try to explain everything. But what we have been working is to prepare an infrastructure to promote the right to be a scientist. And this infrastructure, it's based on open science. We promoted open science in my institution. We are one of the institutes that are promoting it in Brazil, and the South America is doing great on open science, I have to say. But our proposal is to prepare an infrastructure focused on scientific information and to link what research are researching, the topics, and to index everything and to feed the results to other parts of society. Because what we saw during the coronavirus crisis is that society sometimes does not understand science and does not understand the importance of science. So we have tried to link what we have been doing in our institutions with what the civil society have been seen on the real life. And part of this this infrastructure is a framework focused on supporting scientists who have been discussing information disorders like misinformation, disinformation, because these scientists, like I showed in the first slide, they have been being treated because what they are researching. And this framework, as we have been discussing, is focused on preparing institutions, preparing cities, preparing countries to support scientists who do not want to, or who do want to make science more relevant and use science as raw material for developing our society. And as we understand, it's not a matter of just open science. We believe and we promote open science a lot. But you have to have some institutional support. Like it's very easy for somebody to attack a lone scientist, but it's harder to attack an institution. And it's easy to attack an institution, but it's hard to attack a group of institutions. So what we have been building, we are working together with a lot of Brazilian relevant scientific institutions to prepare this common framework to support how scientists could keep doing what they do best, which is science. So thank you very much for opening this space, and thank you all.
Thank you very much, Tiago Braga. And now we will, for thanking or first the landing words of Sir Peter Gluckman and Lydia Brito, and our three panelists will go into the second panelist. So thank you, Tiago Braga, who just spoke, and Jose Beck from the International Science Council, and Krista Kovacs. And now I pass the word to Anne Jose Beck, who will moderate the next panel. Thank you.
So then I suppose we have questions and answers after the second session. Well, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the second panel, where we will explore crucial strategies for advancing the agenda of freedom and responsibility in science, focusing on the protection and support of scientists globally. In this panel, we have gathered a distinguished group of experts who will share their insight and recommendation on how policymakers, decision makers, scientific community, and other stakeholders can collaborate to enhance the safety and freedom of researchers and scholars across the world. Our panelist includes James King, who will discuss the global trends in threats facing scholars and current challenges in the protection efforts of universities and NGO, like Scholars Rescue Fund. Slaven Mislencevic, who will provide an overview of European Union's commitment to the freedom of scientific research and the concrete actions taken to safeguard this essential freedom. Vivi Stavro from ISC will introduce us to the International Science Council initiative, particularly the Science in Times of Crisis program, and discuss proactive strategies for protecting science. Lastly, Konstantinos Tararas will highlight UNESCO's new program aimed at promoting scientific freedom and safety of scientists. After that, we will have a question and answer session. So first, James King, can you provide a brief summary of the Scholar Rescue Fund and the trends you are seeing globally, please?
Thank you, Anne. I also want to thank the ISC and UNESCO for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to start by sharing the words of a recent applicant to our program. She wrote this: "We lived a nightmare before fleeing out of Khartoum. I was happily doing my job as a teacher and researcher, and I never expected that one day I would be forced to leave Sudan. When I found out about the Scholar Rescue Fund, I saw light at the end of the tunnel. Hope that my family can escape this terrible situation. I believe that once this war is over, I and other threatened academics must be well prepared to rebuild what has been destroyed in our country. So the parent organization for the Scholar Rescue Fund is IIE, and we've been assisting threatened academics and students since 1920. But never before, across those 105 years, have we confronted the scale or the intensity of threats to academics as we see today. At SRF, we received more applications in 2023 than any year in our history, for the 7th year in a row. Annual applications have more than doubled since 2017. Tens of thousands of scholars globally are threatened by war. Meanwhile, many other academics face persecution for their research, their political activism, or their identities. You can see on the screen here our top application countries. Last year, they were Sudan, by far the top application country, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Yemen, and Iran. It's been similar this year, though Palestine has replaced Ukraine due to the situation in Gaza. And then if you look in the top 10, across both years, we've seen Cameroon, Ethiopia, Russia, and Turkey. So this is a global crisis. It doesn't affect one particular region. And in response, the Scholar Rescue Fund, we're awarding more fellowships than ever before in our history. Last year, we supported nearly 250 scholars from 24 countries. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges that we and other organizations like ours are facing in our work, but I'll just very, very briefly summarize our model. The Scholar Rescue Fund, we assist academics, so this is not graduate students, this is not undergraduate students, but academics from any country or field who face threats to their lives or scholarly careers. And you can see here, we provide significant funding, expertise, and other resources towards those positions. The institutions that host our scholars are certainly driven by humanitarian concerns and their commitment to scientific and academic freedom, but they benefit tremendously from the presence and the work of our fellows on their campuses, and that's a really important point to emphasize. This isn't only humanitarian. Since we were founded in 2002, we've supported over 1,100 scholars from 62 countries across the globe. And we've partnered with over 500 hosting institutions in 59 countries. I was asked to share some of the challenges to our work, and honestly, we could talk about this all day. So I'll offer just 3 challenges and then move to one potential solution. So the first challenge is sort of reiterating what I've already said. It's the size and complexity of the problem globally. The scale of threats to academics makes it extremely difficult for support organizations like SRF with our limited resources. The same is true of the higher education institutions that are committed to welcoming threatened and displaced scholars. There's simply not enough funding, capacity, or programming to support the tens of thousands of vulnerable academics globally. The second challenge is related. It's the protracted nature of many of these crises. And that means that fewer and fewer displaced academics are able to return home immediately following their temporary fellowships. So this puts additional pressure on the supporting NGOs and the host institutions. Medium-term support, let's say 1 to 3 years, it's simply not enough in 2024. Scholars often need more time to rebuild their lives and careers. They also need additional skill building and mentorship that will make them competitive for jobs in their host countries if they're unable to return. And there's an important role for science organizations in that. Third is mobility. Many scholars are stuck in their situations of threat. Or if they're out, visa restrictions in potential host countries make it difficult for them to travel and continue their work in a safe and supportive environment. One way to address a number of these challenges is to create opportunities within scholars' home regions. So as we sit here in Budapest, we have to remember that our collective work to support threatened academics, it's not limited to North America or Europe. Other regions also have an essential role to play, and they're already on the front lines of hosting students and scholars who are displaced. At SRF, we've been arranging, funding, and supporting fellowships inside scholars' home regions since our founding. Throughout our history, that's nearly 1/3 of our fellows. Venezuelans in Latin America, Sudanese and Cameroonians throughout Africa, and Ukrainians across Central and Eastern Europe, especially Poland. Jordan, the country of Jordan, has hosted the second most SRF fellows throughout our history after the United States. And there are many benefits to keeping scholars inside their home regions. First of all, these placements are less expensive and they tend to be less challenging logistically. They also allow SRF and organizations like ours to support a wider range of threatened academics, including those who aren't able to come to Western Europe or North America, whether due to language barriers, visa restrictions, or higher cost of living. Many scholars prefer to undertake appointments within their home regions, often in the countries where they're already displaced. This allows them to work in their native language, in familiar cultural environments, and often with colleagues they already know, and to remain close to home. These placements also bring critically needed resources, partnerships, and expertise to overstretched host communities. We know that whenever there's a large-scale displacement crisis, the impacted region absorbs the most displaced individuals. And at SRF, we're committed to providing funding and other support that allows these institutions in their region to step up and offer opportunities to their colleagues. We're also, and this is my last point, we're also building new programming for European and North American institutions to partner with these regional hosts. For example, we've developed a pilot initiative with Cornell University in the United States to offer additional funding and scientific resources to Ukrainians who are undertaking SRF fellowships in Eastern Europe. So these virtual affiliations allow the scholars to remain close to Ukraine while also expanding their access to resources and networks through Cornell. In the months ahead, we're going to be expanding this initiative to include other country contexts like Sudan, Nicaragua, hopefully Palestine, and we're also very eager to collaborate with institutions in Europe outside Cornell. I'll stop there, and I look forward to discussing this with all of you later.
Thank you, James. The next speaker is Slaven, Miss Jenešević. That was probably not the right pronunciation, but I tried. Does the European Commission view the freedom of scientific research as a priority for the EU? And if so, what concrete action has to be taken so far to protect and promote this freedom? Please, Slaven.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you, and of course a big thank to UNESCO and ISC for organizing this very important session. So, of course, the European Commission sees the academic freedom of field scientific research as very important values. Often when we talk about these values, we call them the European values, which is actually not entirely correct. These are universal values, sometimes called universal values and a public good. And that's also why, actually, if you look at the academic freedom as such is actually protected in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. We have there the famous Article 13, which states that arts and scientific research shall be free of constraints. Academic freedom shall be respected. However, and as you have probably seen in the presentations about the Academic Freedom Index and several reports such as the Feel Free to Think report, and there are several other studies out there. While if they look at the global stage, European member states do not often pop the top lists of the most worrisome countries. However, if we look at the trend over the past 10 years, we do see a negative trend. We do observe a deterioration when it comes to this freedom across the EU. And of course, from the European Commission, we see this as a very worrisome. A lot of arguments were brought forward. I will repeat a couple. So if there is political or ideological interference in science, science will not reach its full potential. If scientists are not free to set their own science questions or use their solid research methodologies, they might move to somewhere else where this is the case. If the society thinks science is being politicized or censored, the general trust in science will erode, like we have seen during the COVID, unfortunately. While all of these things have been mentioned, I think there's one more, and while I would say it is perhaps more specific for the European Union, although I don't think this is only an EU challenge, which is that if this freedom is protected not in a similar way across different member states, this does not really contribute to creating this single space for research, right? This does not improve cohesion, and this definitely does not improve the effectiveness of this single space. That's why we need some kind of similar safeguarding of this freedom across the EU. As I mentioned, the European Commission thinks this is very important. That's why the European Commission was one of the signatories of the 2020 Bonn Declaration on the freedom of scientific research. We have listed freedom of scientific research as one of the 10 key values and principles that underpin R&I in Europe. While these are important policy documents and policy developments, what is clear is that this is a complex issue that we have to actually battle or tackle on different levels simultaneously. So that's why we have also over the past 2 years working closely together with the member states, with the stakeholders on joint actions. And these actions are quite different depending on the topic, depending of the kind of threats to this freedom. At this stage, we are still looking slightly different at the threats that originate from within the European Union and the threats that originate from outside the European Union. And as I mentioned, we also work differently depending on the level. So for example, when it comes to threats arriving from outside the European Union that impact the freedom of scientific research, we have been conducting what we call mutual learning exercises with the member states. It is basically member states that are interested in this topic come together, they share their good experiences, their bad experiences, and then what we do is we compile the good experiences, the good policies, potentially good policies, and we share this with the other member states and encourage them to consider this. When it comes to higher education institutions, we understand that they need concrete guidance on this. What is their role? They both have rights and obligations when we talk about this topic. That's why 2 years ago we have launched what we call a staff working document on tackling R&I for interference. Nevertheless, what is quite useful in that document is that we do have a whole chapter dedicated to the values, to the protection of this freedom, for example, international partnerships, where we really stress, as was mentioned and quite well signaled by Sir Peter Gluckman, was that we should not anything what we do should be proportionate, right? Open as possible, closed and necessary can be easily misinterpreted and easily misused. So that's why open by default, but also the line to take is always continue collaborating, but be aware of the risks that are out there and try to mitigate them. On the level of individuals, we are currently developing on what we call a one-stop shop, which will provide information to individual researchers about how they can, among other things, protect themselves in certain cases. And this is going to be a very pragmatic and very hands-on tool for the researchers to use. Now, if you look at all these initiatives, these are non-legislative initiatives. These are more soft initiatives and definitely very important to make progress on this. What I think is quite interesting and definitely new is that following the resolution of the European Parliament, in which the European Parliament requested the European Commission to work on a legislative proposal to protect this freedom across the European Union, and the European Commission has answered positively on this. At this moment, actually some weeks ago we started with that, we are conducting an exercise in which we are gathering evidence about this. We are looking at what is the state of de jure and de facto protection of this freedom in EU and a couple of countries outside EU to create, as I mentioned, this evidence based that could potentially justify or create evidence for any future legislative proposal on this front. And this is something which is, of course, quite ambitious and something that we are very much look forward to, because it could be quite groundbreaking, especially in the EU.
Thank you, Slaven. The next speaker is Vivi Stavro, and Vivi, how did the ISC come to initiate the Science in Times of Crisis program? Please.
Thank you, Anne, and good morning to everyone. I'm going to focus on looking at the ISC's program and different portfolio of work around science in times of crisis. Now, as Anne mentioned, the Committee for Freedom and Responsibility in Science monitors and responds to cases of individual scientists whose freedoms and rights are restricted as a result of carrying out their scientific research, as well as cases concerning the irresponsible practice of science. However, we also monitor more generic cases, broader, thematic, disciplinary, national level threats to the free and responsible practice of science. And this includes instances where the integrity and existence of whole science systems and infrastructure are threatened. So, national level threats to scientific and academic governance, to teaching and research producing institutions, as well as existential threats, if we may, related to severe crises such as natural disasters and wars. And here the Council works to convene the Council's members and networks, partners, to respond to the multiple crises impacting upon the scientific community around the world. And we do so via advocacy, actions and statements coming out from the Council. For example, let's look at the war in Sudan, a statement on concerns over the continued escalation of extreme violence in Sudan. If I may say, this took us by surprise, but it was the single most disseminated statement the ISC has ever done. And I think because the Sudanese community just took that and worked with it, advocating broadly around the world. We do science, we open up resource pages, which we keep live around offers of assistance, hosting financial support for at-risk and displaced Sudanese scientists, Palestinian scientists, Ukrainian, Afghan, in areas where there are conflicts and where the international scientific community and partners, it's broad. The ecosystem is not only researchers, can support displaced, threatened, exiled, refugee scientists. And also a series of articles that you may have noticed on our webpage, which have been taken up by publications looking at, for science-based articles, the impact of the damage and the theft coming out of Sudan's seed bank and the impact on Sudan and the region. Likewise, the damage to the Sudan National Museum, and various articles like that with different countries in conflict. We've also worked with partners, International Academy Panel, the World Academy of Sciences. Some people are here in this room, including very much at-risk scientists to do the Science in Exile network. Arising out of this network, we constituted an emergency committee called the Science Stakeholders Crisis Group, which comes together, it's come together twice so far. First time in 2021 with Afghanistan, when the Taliban came back and we had this massive discrimination against women and girls participating in education and science. And then when the war escalated in Ukraine in February 22, and resulting in a protracted crisis, out of that group, working closely with European partners, We held 2 conferences looking at responses from the European higher education and research sectors to support at-risk scientists in Ukraine, and also increasingly looking at the impact of the science system itself in the country. Key messages arising out of all of this work are the international solidarity and taking responsibility. Partnerships are critical. Governments, higher education, and research community must work together to deliver their national commitments to recognizing and supporting the right to education and science within their country during crises, also extending that to refugee, exiled, and displaced scientists from other countries. And another recognition which led to research that we did is the recognition that the prevailing context that we are currently living in is one of polycrisis, where wars, natural disasters, including pandemics, are the new normal. We cannot wait and reinvent the protection and support mechanisms every time there is a new disaster, a new war takes place. Stakeholders need to develop sustainable frameworks within and between national scientific, higher education, and research systems. And so we identified a gap that the scientific community is excellent at researching crises, but we're less good. We neglect looking at how crises impact upon us, impact upon the community itself, its systems, and its institutions. So we wrote this ISC report, Protecting Science in Times of Crisis. How do we stop being reactive and become proactive? Addressing the urgent need for a new approach to safeguard science and its practitioners during disasters and wars. We interviewed people. It's based on case studies ranging across the world and across different types of crisis contexts. As you can see here, catastrophic fires in Brazil and South Africa, nuclear disaster, the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan, wars in the Balkans, Iraq, and Ukraine. So there's currently no global framework, and this paper makes quite a lot of very practical suggestions towards that. Clearly, this needs to be taken up by UNESCO, by our UN partners and regional partners across the world. There is a global framework for education and culture, not greatly funded, but it exists, and we need to do it for ourselves within the scientific community. So this paper is a first step towards scoping a more effective, joined-up, and predictable approach to the protection and rebuilding of science systems so that the world is still able to benefit from scientific teaching and discovery even when conflict and disaster strikes. Give you 3 little infographics. The paper is structured around 3 phases of a crisis: improving preparedness, enhancing response, and ensuring stronger recovery. The findings from our work suggest that too often the scientific community's response to crisis remains uncoordinated, ad hoc, reactive, and incomplete. All actors in the science and research sector share a responsibility to better prepare for crises. The sector itself needs to take greater responsibility for its internal risk assessment. We so often say we researchers, risk assessment, crisis management has got nothing to do with scientists. We need to build this capacity for risk assessment and mitigation, to build capacity of scientists and leaders in crisis and risk management, to get more resources for prevention, and to help develop action frameworks with partners across different sectors. And very important, at a broader level, widening and deepening public understanding of the value and return on investment of the sciences is a critical step in increasing trust in and ultimately support for an investment in science. Then we look at, and I've reached the end very quickly, enhancing response during crisis, being more agile, being more flexible in this respect, and lastly, ensuring stronger recovery. The science sector is rarely treated as a priority in rebuilding efforts of national and international authorities, and leaders of the science sector need to be in the position to influence policy response to ensure that science is on the recovery and rebuilding agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivi. The last speaker in this panel is Konstantinos Tararas. Konstantinos, tell us about UNESCO's new program on the promotion of scientific freedom and the safety of scientists and its related call to action, please.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thanks to all the speakers for the very rich perspectives. The difficult task of really capturing some of the key elements of the UNESCO program on freedom and safety of scientists and the related call to action. Let me highlight first of all the idea behind this, which is basically to translate an international instrument that was mentioned by my colleagues earlier, the 2017 recommendation on science and scientific researchers, into action on the ground. A second important element is that this is an initiative that comes with the support of all UNESCO member states. There is a dedicated program created by the General Conference of the organization, and the call to action was subscribed explicitly by over 60 countries from different regions of UNESCO. So what is the program about? The elements of the program that you can find spread within the call to action are interventions that are inspired by successful work of the organization in domains like freedom of expression of journalists, which is a well-established program of UNESCO for several decades. The first thing, and this is something that a lot of the speakers have highlighted, is the issue of data and knowledge production. If we don't know what the problem is, how can we develop appropriate policies? How can we develop appropriate actions on the ground? And even though there were several figures that have been shared with you, and there are important developments, important instruments like the Academic Freedom Index, we looked at earlier this year at available research, and it remains quite incomplete. There are a lot of issues, aspects of the rights to scientific freedom and the threats and infringements that remain undetected under research. We know, for example, that as many of the speakers have mentioned, early career researchers, women scientists, scientists in conflict and crisis situations are particularly at risk. But the evidence that is to be, or also scientists who work on particularly controversial topics, whether it is the environmental scientists and those working on climate change or on COVID or other thorny and controversial issues, the evidence on what they are facing is little. It indicates a problem, but much more needs to be done in this respect. And something that we would like to work on is creating a set of indicators that will help conduct a more solid and holistic situation analysis. A good example that we're drawing from is the work that UNESCO has been doing in the area of ethics of artificial intelligence. Based on an international instrument, a set of indicators have been developed. And so based on that set of indicators, countries have going through a process of inclusive situation analysis that has proved very useful in terms of changing policy frameworks, etc. The second thing, obviously, is once we know what is happening, change the policy frameworks, right? And so in order to do that, we want to create a space where policy advisors from different ministries in charge with the issue of scientific freedom, but also the scientific community, the civil society organizations will be identifying gaps, identifying needs and developing responses. And one of the first tasks that we want this space to address is the assessment tool that I was mentioning. So the set of indicators for situation analysis. The third pillar is making sure that difference happens on the ground. And in this respect, we had the opportunity to work with the support of SIDA, the Swedish International Cooperation Agency, in 6 African countries to translate the recommendation of 2017 into policies. And so in that context, we are able to see how effective, or at least the potential of working on the ground with country administrations, with local constituencies, to really create the policy and the practical instruments for implementation. And so we were successful in seeing revised and new policies adopted in 5 out of the 6 countries, where the issue of scientific freedom, with particular emphasis on gender equality, was addressed. A fourth point is the issue of education and advocacy. We know that a lot more has to happen in this respect. An indicative example, you are all familiar with the work of the Human Rights Council, an institution that oversees human rights implementation in countries participating in the UN. Scientific freedom is, if my memory is not mistaken, is 2% of recommendations that address freedom of expression of the Human Rights Council. The rest being majority focusing on freedom of the press and the media. And of course, building alliances. Sir Peter Gluckman was mentioning the alliance between ISC and UNESCO, with the European Commission and like-minded institutions, but the scientific community. The space of the World Science Forum being an opportunity to really raise awareness, put the spotlight on the main issues at hand. I would like to maybe finish with 2 takeaway points. One is the importance of seizing the opportunities that international developments provide. You have been working, all of you, on issues of science, international cooperation. You see in recent strategic frameworks adopted by the UN, UNESCO, a lot more emphasis on a rights-based approach to science and international universal values being acknowledged as a basis for science production. The UN Pact for the Future, I think, is a perfect example where we have an acknowledgement of the importance of promoting science, technology, innovation for human rights implementation, and explicitly the issue of intellectual autonomy and the safety of scientists. The second thing, and of course I should also highlight in this respect the International Decade on Sciences for Sustainable Development as a framework that offers an opportunity for action for the next 10 years. The last point is, again, seizing this momentum, and I would like to really highlight the right to science in this respect. You have been following, again, the work maybe of the World Science Forum, work on science, into science diplomacy over the last several years. I think you won't find in earlier gatherings references to the right to science as many as we see today. So I think this is really a very positive momentum that we really need to continue and expand. And let me close with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Konstantinos. I'm sorry that the time for questions and answers has already gone. I want to summarize these 2 panels just by saying that freedom and responsibility in science is of utmost importance, and I think we can all agree to that. We have heard that there is international solidarity to these things, but there is, of course, a lack of legal or legislation that can put this into an international context. It's up to each and every country, and I think EU may be a good instrument to work more in the European community, but the world is more than EU, and we need to see that as an international effort that UNESCO can help out with and that ISC can help out with. And I want to end this session by saying that UNESCO and International Science Council, in collaboration, makes a strong effort to implement the situation for freedom and responsibility in science. I want to thank the panelists, the organizers of this session, and the audience for being with us for 1.5 hours, I think it is, all together, listening to, I think, important input to this field that we all feel strongly about. Thank you to all of you.